Welcome back to Coventry Confidential. A year ago, I started this over budget season and did about a half a dozen interviews. Now I'm going to break my record pretty quickly, even before budget season starts. And also, throughout the year, I would like to do other things. We have America's 250th anniversary coming up, so I'll probably get some more people on regarding that. But here is a special edition of Coventry Confidential regarding, once again, the shooting range ordinance 267 for home ranges. I have the privilege of having Coventry's police chief, Eric Peterson, here to talk about it again, because I wanted to make sure, once again, that the disinformation and also the mystery of town government sort of gets demystified regarding not only the ordinance 267, but just everything and how Coventry operates. And hopefully I can provide even more information as people head into the special town meeting at 7 p.m. on March 31st at the Coventry High School in Veterans Auditorium. So, Chief Eric Peterson, thank you very much for coming on this Sunday afternoon, about 40 minutes before tip-off for UConn. Yeah. So I want to get you out so you can settle in and get ready for the game. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, good to be here.
So let's just get some background in regarding how long have you been the police chief for the Coventry PD?
Coming up on 4 years. It'll be 4 years in July.
Okay, and where did you come from originally?
Plainville. I was in Plainville, Connecticut for 25 years prior to coming to Coventry. So I retired from there and came out here and making another go at it.
And how big is Plainville? What kind of town is that compared to Coventry?
A little bit different. Where Coventry is more rural, it's 40 square mile, 12,000 people. Plainville's a little smaller area-wise. It's about 8 square mile, but there's 19,000 people.
And when you approach, I come from Munson, Massachusetts, so right over the line. I remember as a teenager, one time we made the national news because they shut down our police department. We were the town without a police department because of budget issues. Okay. So I've seen, and we had one volunteer cop just driving up and down Main Street, just trying to keep things going. But it just feels like, we're out in the middle of New England. And what is sort of like the overall take on how policing gets done in a small rural town, when you have a police force?
Yeah. So, people a lot of people do know how good we have it here in Coventry, having a police force. And some people, don't understand how much police work there actually is in a small town. It's rural, so a lot of people think there's not much police work. But, like I say, I come from a little bit busier of a place, but, there's a lot of police work here. And with a lot of our surrounding towns that are the same size, they have the state police cover or they'll have resident state troopers. But, you don't get that hometown police feeling by having that, and the police response time may not be as good, or there's a lot of amenities that you have having a police department. There's always 2 people working in Coventry, 2 police officers, so you'll have a good response time if you need the police. And there's a lot of other things that go along with it, where if you're looking to get your pistol permit, you have your local PD. It's a lot easier to do that. If you need a record, a police report, things like that, they're much easier to access. So there's a lot of benefit to having a police department in a small town.
And Coventry is unique because it is one of the biggest towns geographically in Connecticut. It takes a while to get from one end to another. Does that play a factor in the policing in this town?
Yes, we have an overlap with our schedule. So sometimes in the afternoon we'll have 3 on or 4 for a short time, but we always have 2 on, so we'll split the town in half. But there are times where we'll utilize the state police for mutual aid, or Willimantic or Vernon or UConn PD. So we do have different areas of town, depending on where we are, that we'll utilize mutual aid.
Wanted to really jump into Ordinance 267, and one of the big things is that I've been seeing a lot of times, even really from the start, this is something that blew up because 2 neighbors couldn't get along. when I was talking with Dudley, that wasn't, we addressed that, we talked about it, and he mentioned that came with a stack of issues with the ordinance. And I know we might be going a little back and forth because I should talk about the origin of this ordinance. But is it more than just one neighbor? Is it an issue among Coventry that we should have an ordinance?
Yeah, I've tried to put the information out there, and like I told you earlier, I'll be putting something on my webpage, the police department's Facebook page, later this afternoon, early evening. But there was this one town, one residence in town where we had issues, but that wasn't the only one. Over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've had a good handful of, I'd say, a good six issues, different locations in town where there have been different issues with people shooting on their property. So it all stemmed from the ordinance came from when I was working with the state's attorney trying to figure out, what was on the books for crimes, which, there isn't really many unless it's extremely dangerous or something reckless. But the state's attorney was the one that made the recommendation that the town of Coventry develop an ordinance. And there's quite a few towns in the state that already have an ordinance. So, I passed that information along to the town manager. He passed it along to the council, and they adopted a firearms committee who they put a lot of work into this. They put a lot of time, work, and consideration into it. And in my eyes, they did an excellent job, and they didn't make it too stringent. They put some common sense things in there that people practice anyway. And that's, they recommended an ordinance, and the town council adopted it.
Mhm.
But that's what I think a lot of people in town need to know, that this recommendation for an ordinance on home shooting ranges came from the state's attorney, who is the top chief law enforcement agency for the county, Talon County, and that's where it originated from. And a little history there is, I did a little research where legislatures doesn't have laws on the books for this because each town's different, has different dynamics, different. Layouts.
Density, yeah, exactly.
So you leave it to each individual municipality to determine whether they need an ordinance. So, my eyes as the police chief, I felt that we needed one also.
Now, do these events have to have a critical mass? Does it have to be a certain number of issues for the state attorney to go to make a recommendation? Or is it something, because once again, we talked about it in the previous thing, that because it's not one size fits all. They look at the factors. They look at the geography of Coventry. They look at the density of Coventry and everything, and then go, you know what, maybe it's time you start thinking about an ordinance for this.
Yeah. So that's where, I reached out to him when I was, we were investigating a case, and to try to determine, what is on the books. Is it a breach of peace with what, was going on? And that's when he brought that idea up. And unless someone's really reckless, if someone's doing something extremely dangerous or they're reckless, then the police can take action. There's reckless endangerment, that's a criminal statute, or breach of peace can be there. And in the state's attorney's eyes, where it was. So, when we go to these calls now, we're limited to what we can do. If someone's shooting in close proximity to someone else's house, unless there's something extremely dangerous, we're limited to what we can do. So, there are no laws really on the books that just pertain to home shooting ranges. There are for hunting. There's guidelines and laws for hunting, but nothing for someone that wants to put a range and shoot in the back of their yard.
Well, so that's the conflict here, is that we're constantly told by other sources that there are books on the state about that. I even had somebody get back to me regarding my original podcast with Dudley. Oh, there's a so-and-so statue. And I looked it up, and in 30 seconds, I'm like, that's a hunting statue. We said that in the other interview, that you can't use hunting for home ranges. And why is that? Why? Because it's a law. So you can't put it onto something else. Is that it? Is that?
Yeah, right. So it's designed for hunting, so it's not applicable. Like I say, I said earlier, if someone's reckless or doing something dangerous, if they're shooting and their backstop's not that high, and then there's someone's living behind that backstop, then we can say, hey, this is too dangerous. But most times that issues there was miles of woods behind where they're shooting, so not dangerous. But if you're perpendicular to someone's living portion of their yard and you're shooting, that becomes dangerous. When we're the line, police, in a range shooting for police training, we have this imaginary line where we're on the range, and nothing downrange can be there, nothing to the side of us. So when someone's shooting in there on a personal property, that could happen where it could be a dangerous situation. But if there isn't, then there's like I said earlier, there's limited options that we have, and I didn't think the firearms committee was too stringent. They could have went 500 feet. They're recommended 250 feet, and that's what they've adopted. But me personally, I wouldn't want someone shooting outside of my living room window or my deck. Only 150, 200 feet. To me personally, 250 feet isn't far enough, but it's something. It's something that, and that's, I think, why the town council adopted the ordinance, because it does give the police officers options and guidelines to go to when they go to these calls to follow.
So none of the state statutes, like Connecticut statute 53-203 or 53A-182, would address home gun range safety.
Right. So a breach of peace could. So if someone's shooting in their 50, 60, 80 feet or 100 feet from your home, that could be considered a breach of peace, depending on the situation. We would open up an investigation, consult with the state's attorney, and then determine whether we would do a warrant for breach of peace. But the other criminal statute that could be applicable is reckless endangerment. If like I said earlier, if the situation was extremely dangerous or reckless, then we could probably go there. But it could be a stretch, or every situation is different. We would have to investigate and take all the facts and circumstances and determine if there's probable cause to make an arrest.
No, so if there is an arrest made, this could make somebody's life really difficult too. That
Correct.
An ordinance on the books, because you have Tallinn, which passed their ordinance. They said 350 feet, and Coventry looked at that ordinance and really made something sort of similar to that.
Right.
Everything ended. Once the ordinance and everybody understood what how you should set up your home range, there was never complaints after.
Right. Correct.
But if you get arrested or charged with stuff, you're now dealing with fees. You're dealing with, you get a record. Well, not a record, but you get booked and everything else that comes with that.
You got to take time off of work, go to court, determine whether you want to hire a lawyer, and we don't want to go down that road. We don't want to arrest anybody. That's why I thought an ordinance is a good place to be. Even if this ordinance does pass, we're just out there to educate people and try to keep Coventry a good place to live. This is a quality of life issue. So it's not just, some people say, well, it's just a noise ordinance. It's not. It's also giving guidelines for safety, and there is a noise component of it, but it is a quality of life issue, and it's a good it's a good thing to do, to put this ordinance into place. So like you said, there's limited options, and having this ordinance gives us guidelines when we respond to these calls.
What is the difference between a law and an ordinance?
Well, a law is a criminal statute that is governed by the court, and if someone violates it, we arrest them, give them a court date, and go there. Where an ordinance is just something locally. So if you violate that ordinance, you're just given a fine, and you pay the town the fine for violating the ordinance. But if this ordinance does take effect, we like to give people, opportunities to know that they're violating the ordinance. Even, first time violation wouldn't be a fine. We would just educate them and say, hey, this is a violation. And unless it was something extreme and willful, we like to work with our community and get them to, want to comply. So we would put that in place and try to get people to comply once they know that, okay, I am violating the town ordinance. Let me do things different next time.
So it's basically something that provides a framework of civility in a way between neighbors and also the police department and their relationship with the citizens of the town, that you're not going from 0 to 60 with a
Correct.
possible arrest, you can okay, I made a mistake, and now you engage with somebody, educate them about it, and there's also a universal understanding from people who do not have gun ranges, do not own guns in town, but understand that, let's say, their Sunday afternoon is not going to be full of hearing guns going off for 8 hours, basically,
Right.
stuff. And what do you think of the time limit? Because that has entered into the discussion a number of times. Is like, oh, once I start the clock, and then I have another person at home who wants to shoot at the end of the day, I can't, because I started target practice at 8 o'clock in the morning, and now somebody else can't. I mean, how does that work out?
So I've received quite a few calls over the last few weeks, and I've had even people stop in and talk, and we've discussed this. So, and I discussed it with the committee. So the 4 hour limit, I'm kind of up in the air. Is that enough time? I guess it's reasonable. Could six be better? But the thing you got to know is that a lot of people, I think, don't shoot more than a 4 hour period anyway, and it doesn't prevent someone. So say two people live in a home, someone goes out there, they shoot for 4 hours the early part of the day, someone comes home from work, wants to shoot a little bit in the afternoon, they're allowed to. It's not per residence, it's per person, I think, is the way it's going to lay out. The way when I read it, and that's the way we'll enforce the ordinance if it's passed. It's per person, not per residence. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, that gives people more more time where it's not like people that are shooting are going to be out there every weekend shooting. It's sporadic when people choose to shoot. And ammunition is expensive these days, but you don't you don't want, I get it, you don't want overreach where people are limited to use their property the way they want to be able to. So I think that way it's a little easier for people to take the ordinance and understand it. But again, it just boils down to it's a quality of life issue, and you got to be a good neighbor and get along. But that someone had mentioned that at one of the meetings, that if you're going to put your kid down for a nap, or if you're having a party and you tell your neighbor, hey, maybe don't make noise from this hour block, most times the neighbors will comply and they get along. But I've been in police in 30 years, and I've been doing this long enough to know, but there's also that neighbor that won't. They're going to go out there and shoot just because they know now that is bothering you. So it's gotta you gotta give a little, but it doesn't always happen that way.
So what do you know you probably talk to other police departments throughout Connecticut who have ordinance like this.
Yes.
What has been, once the ordinance is passed and put into effect, I mean, what happens? Is there a change where things calm down and people you know find that this ordinance is not in the way of being able to target practice in your backyard? I mean, what is the reaction, in general, to ordinance like these?
Yeah, when I reached out to, I reached out to maybe a half dozen, 8 different towns with ordinances, and yeah, exactly what you said earlier with Tallinn. Once they put the ordinance in place, they haven't had any issues. And let me just say this too: this ordinance isn't too intrusive, really. And I think a lot of people that are against it, they just don't understand all the details of it. But some of them may not even read the ordinance. But a lot of things that are in that ordinance, people are doing already. I don't know too many places in town where someone's shooting within 250 feet of their neighbor's house anyway. And the committee did a great job too. Is they left a caveat in there. If you get a letter from your neighbor, he's okay with you shooting. Just say it's 180 feet from his home, and he doesn't mind. You still have the option to be able to do that. So a lot of those things. I'll say that again. A lot of these things they put into the ordinance, people do anyway. Most people aren't shooting within 250 feet. Most people don't shoot for more than 4 hours, and most people have a reasonable background of what they're shooting into. And I've heard some different things, and I think the committee was very smart where they said they didn't want to put it out there. Your berm or your backstop needs to be 6 feet wide, 4 feet high, 4 feet thick, because now it kind of locks you into, if there is an accident, you could say, well, I follow what was on the ordinance. The way they put it leaves responsibility on the person shooting and the homeowner. You still have to have a berm sufficient enough to stop whatever you're shooting. If you're shooting a high-powered rifle, you're going to need a much bigger backstop and stronger backstop than an air gun or a BB gun. So they kind of left it open, and I thought it was pretty smart to leave it like that, because leaves the responsibility on the homeowner still, and the person shooting, to make sure that their backstop is sufficient.
Now, BB guns, thank you for mentioning that, because that has come up a few times in my research about that was like the deal breaker right there, that you're also getting involved in BB guns. Now, in some of the research, there are high-powered air pressure rifles that are designed to kill a deer.
Right.
And also there's BB guns where, you got it for Christmas and you're shooting in the backyard and, dinging up squirrels or Coke cans. What is that? I mean, because sometimes the BB gun language seems to be the deal breaker for even people who are in favor of the ordinance.
When I looked at the ordinance, and I worked with the committee a bit. So same thing. You're responsible for that BB. And like I just mentioned, that BB is a lot less dangerous coming out of the BB gun as opposed to a projectile coming out of an assault rifle, or a 9mm round coming out of a handgun. So if you're out in the backyard shooting your BB gun, you just have to make sure whatever your backstop is, is sufficient. If it's a sheet of plywood will stop a BB, no problem. And it's big enough. It's 4x8 full piece. And then whatever's behind that plywood, you still have a lot of open space. So, so this ordinance wouldn't prevent someone from going out into their backyard, shooting their BB gun. Again, as long as you have something sufficient to stop that BB. And again, that's, to repeat myself again, that's going to be a lot different of a backstop, than a high-powered rifle. So, that you wanted to get that out there too, is that it doesn't prevent someone from doing that, shooting a BB gun.
And there's no two-way violations. I mean, Dudley and I covered that in the previous podcast, and I know you're not a two-way lawyer. You're just the chief of police. But I mean, what is your thoughts regarding restricting two-way? I know it sounds like there was a lot of conversation about that too.
It would be a little more specific. I'm not sure what you're asking me.
I guess I've also seen in some of the footage I watched that there was big concerns that the Second Amendment was being violated.
Yeah.
But I don't see that.
No, to me, that this doesn't even go near the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment gives you the right to bear arms. You can still bear arms. All this is doing is giving you guidelines when you shoot in your backyard, if you have a home range, on what you can do. So, if you read the Second Amendment, this isn't it. And if that was the case, I think all these other towns with ordinances, they would have been overturned by now. So clearly this isn't a Second Amendment issue. And I'd like to just put out there too, is there are a lot of towns out there with a 500-foot restriction, which again is a little more intrusive. And this committee, I think, didn't want to do that. So they were pretty reasonable. But yeah, the Second Amendment, to me, this doesn't go near it,
We pretty much covered a lot of things and just really clarified the issues, that this is a town-wide thing that you felt you needed to bring to the state attorneys. And here we are with a nonpartisan committee basically coming up with, the Ordinance 267. I was wondering if there's anything else you would like to make sure people know about before they show up for the special town hall meeting on the 31st.
Just to really read the, read the ordinance and see what it states. Read it for yourself. Maybe someone interpreted it for you or told you it, but it's out there online. Read it, and you could see that it, like I said earlier, it is pretty reasonable in my eyes, and I don't think there's too many people already, doing. Violating what that ordinance is. So it's, it's just the way, I think as Coventry becomes more populated, you need to have that. So, some people have 15 acres of land, but their neighbors are close, so they have to utilize the land where they're not on top of their neighbor, shooting a firearm, and you go a little, into your property, so you're not, on top of your neighbor. And we've had issues with, berms, people not having the right berm or backstop, and we're able to intervene and tell them, to not to shoot. So some thought was, well, you do that anyway now, so why even put this ordinance in place? I look at it, I see the point they're making, but I look at it as, because it gives people guidelines, and it gives us some guidelines when we go to someone's home, or, if a neighbor's concerned, we can make sure that, basic safety things are put into place, and that, there is that distance that, be a good neighbor and at least be 250 feet away. So I don't think there's too many people out there that can't shoot their weapons that are already doing it based on this ordinance, and just prevent someone from doing things like this in the future, going too close, or not having a big enough berm, or shooting for an extended period of time during the day. Really, those are the three main issues in that ordinance. So it's reasonable.
Well, hey, Chief, thank you very much for
Okay.
coming on. I think, let you go before the game starts.
All right. Well, it's good talking to you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right. Take care.